I'm the Talking Skull, and this year I'm playing classic first-person shooters to draw a line from Wolfenstein 3D to Halo. This week, it's the end of an era. Quake was mind-blowing at release. The first fully 3D shooter, complete with animated polygonal models instead of 2D sprites, Quake looked like nothing else you could buy. Even today, playing all the games that led up to it and then stepping into Quake, the difference is palpable. Quake's little world feels more tangible than any of its predecessors. To engage with that 3D environment, Quake offers fully unbounded camera movement. So much of that old shooter feel from the early to mid-90s comes from the constrained camera that only lets you look left and right. Even Marathon's revolutionary vertical mouse look was pretty strictly limited. Not so with Quake. The movement and aiming are snappy, responsive, and freeing, and make this game feel much more modern than its competitors. With free mouse look and simple, true 3D assets, Quake almost feels more like a modern indie game than an old AAA title. Setting aside technical innovations, perhaps the most exciting thing about Quake is its star contributor, Nine Inch Nails maestro Trent Reznor. A huge Doom fan, Reznor's industrial style was a perfect fit for id's games, and his Quake soundtrack speaks for itself. The music for Quake is mostly ambiance, full of wailing, pounding, throbbing horribleness that directly inspired Akira Yamaoka's excellent work on Silent Hill. But Reznor didn't just work on the music. Reznor is credited as the sound designer, creating sound effects for the game up to and including doing his own voice work for the player character's grunting. Sweet nostalgia. As a tribute, the nail gun and its ammo pay homage to Reznor. Quake's first couple of episodes are masterclasses in FPS design. The first game in the series to have no map, possibly due to the difficulty of making a 3D map readable, Quake can't demand convoluted exploration. If you get lost, you have no fallback, so Quake's levels wind up a bit more linear. That doesn't mean they're simple, though. Levels are littered with side paths, secrets, interconnected sections, and distinct rooms that are just open enough to hide one or two surprises while clearly signposting the way forward. All of these diversions either end in a quick reward and a dead end, or wrap back around to the main path. Much like Heretic's guard tower, they offer just enough room to stretch your legs before quietly reining you back in. The result is a game that feels streamlined and clean. The enemy design here is some of the best in the business too. It'd provide more unique enemy behaviors than ever before, all prompting different styles of engagement from the player. Zombies that come back to life unless you give them, loads of distinct projectile weapons, and a take on Doom's lost souls that makes the lunge much more organic and less stilted. Hey, wait a minute. Things start to go off the rails by episode 4, though. These levels are the only ones where I felt the lack of a map really hurt. Lateral, labyrinthine layouts with little sense of direction too often leave you wandering samey corridors, straining to understand where you've been and where you still need to go. This final episode also introduces the Spawn. Look at these little shits. Half the time I can barely even see them in these shadowy halls. If these things had a little less health and paused longer between jumps, then their whole exploding on death thing would be pretty neat. As it is, they are infuriating, giving you no space to maneuver and jumping on you faster than they can be killed. Oh yeah, and enemies spawning behind you ninjutsu style also makes a return here. It's thankfully not as bad as in Marathon 2, but it's still not a fun setup, and I wish these games would stop doing it. There's this ideology in 90s shooters that later levels should only ever get bigger and more confusing with more punishing encounters. It stands in stark contrast to modern shooters where the final levels are often the most tight and focused so that they can build hype leading up to the climax. Developers in the 90s didn't seem to understand how to pace out the action to present an exciting finale, and instead ended with the slowest, most tedious levels in the pursuit of a smooth difficulty curve. It doesn't help that the idea of set pieces was still a fringe concept, only really seen from Bungie at this point. No climactic high-flying stunts here. The problems with Quake's final levels are more than just ideological, though. This episode feels unfinished. The best example is these altars. Why don't they glow or give any in-game indication that you should shoot them? And why is there no animation when they're destroyed? This text overlay explaining what to do and telling you when it's done, with no animation or visual effects at all, feels like a placeholder that the designer would put in temporarily until the art is finished. But the art never finished. The game shipped with this. All this is capped off with a really underwhelming final boss. You don't even get to fight a boss, you just grind through one last meat wall of enemies and then credits roll. In the Duke Nukem 3D versus Quake debate, I really expected to come down on the side of Quake. Having played both back-to-back, I'm not sure. I love Quake's sense of atmosphere, and the soundtrack is a masterpiece, but the game feels disjointed and peters out hard. Duke Nukem 3D has more consistent level design and more weapon variety. Quake's Super Shotgun, Super Nail Gun, and Rocket Launcher almost exclusively replace their earlier alternatives. Why would I ever switch to the Nail Gun if it does less damage and uses the same ammo? Add in the already smaller weapon count, and when it comes to weapons you'll actually use, you never have more than 4. Duke Nukem 3D even looks better, despite how impressive Quake's 3D engine is. Quake's environments are less detailed and more repetitive, with less to look at in general, and these enemy animations are, well, early 3D animation. Overall, I quite enjoyed Quake's campaign, especially the first 3 episodes, but it's easy to see why some people felt it should have been more like Duke Nukem 3D. But let's get to the real stuff. When people talk about Quake, they're not talking about the campaign. Carrying on the torch of Doom's deathmatches, Quake launched with a glut of multiplayer maps and single-player levels tweaked to accommodate competitive play. More importantly, support for playing online came quicker and better. Bungie may have invested into multiplayer earlier, but with a larger audience, tighter movement, unbounded mouse look, internet matches, and a rocket launcher, Quake was the obvious breeding ground for the first true esports scene.
Oh, buddy is here. Oh, shit. Oh, fuck, this is a death hole.
Idiot!
I'm not dead. I'm somehow not dead, but I am not dead.
In 1997, the Red Annihilation tournament brought 2,000 players participating in online qualifiers before the top 16 were flown out to E3 for playoff matches, which were broadcast live for internet audiences. The winner, Dennis Thresh Fong, took home John Carmack's Ferrari as a prize. Among Thresh's many advantages in 1997 was his keyboard layout. While Quake's default controls remained the industry standard, arrow keys with a toggle strafe button to switch from turning to strafing, Thresh rebound his controls to a less widespread style, WASD. The ergonomic positioning and easy access to strafe buttons provided by WASD helped Thresh shine, and popularized the WASD layout that would become industry standard within just a year or two. Quake was the last game made by the original id team. An engine that was still not finished a year into the game's development, and creative disagreements between Romero and Carmack, resulted in a rocky and overly long development, during which Quake saw planned features scrapped and the entire game retooled away from what was originally a melee-focused RPG dungeon crawler. This late-stage retooling may be part of the reason why it feels like certain things shipped unfinished. You may notice that each episode has a distinct concept, but that they aren't linked together in any meaningful way. They all share the same dingy color palette, and they all start with a single level of this military complex, but otherwise they're each just sort of their own thing. This is because, well, they're each just sort of their own thing. It took so long for Romero and id to settle on a concept for this game that once they did, there wasn't enough time left to retool or throw out the levels and art that had already been made. Instead, each designer had made their own little set of levels in whatever style they liked, and when crunch time rolled around, those disparate ideas just got assigned episode numbers and shipped as Quake. When the dust settled, in spite of the game's success, John Romero and Sandy Petersen left id. Romero had been a driving force behind Wolfenstein 3D and Doom. Along with Carmack's engineering, Romero's vision created the FPS genre as we knew it, as well as pioneering multiplayer deathmatches. On top of that, the levels Romero designed remained some of the best in their respective games. Petersen's work I'm less fond of, but he also made more than half of the original Doom's maps, and it's undeniable that his work was a huge part of id's legacy. With Romero and Petersen gone, id's future would look very different, with the bulk of design falling on the shoulders of newer hires. I have to say though, if Quake is any example, I'm not too worried. Tim Willits designed most of Quake's first episode, and it's solid stuff. Moreover, it was American McGee who suggested that they get the project on track by switching gears back to the FPS genre, and his demo levels provided the proof of concept for Quake as a shooter. If you want to play Quake, Steam's got a new remaster, and it's good. There are some valid complaints, like the soundtrack being slightly dampened, but it also has working online play, and the subtle differences won't stop you from having a good time. If this old stuff is interesting to you, check out the rest of my series on first-person shooters to see what I had to say about Doom and more. And if there's anything you think I should cover, leave a comment so I can see. With the back-to-back releases of Duke Nukem 3D and Quake, the PC first-person shooter scene had fully hit its stride. Next week, we'll see the last leg of Bungie's marathon.